I invite our legislators to please take their seats up here on stage as I introduce our moderator for today's program. So, Paul Matthews is the new Executive Director and CEO of the Worcester Regional Research Bureau, a nonprofit organization that conducts independent, nonpartisan research and analysis of public policy issues that impact Greater Worcester in order to educate the public and policymakers. The Research Bureau has issued hundreds of reports and briefs on a wide range of topics, including economic development, public education, transportation, municipal finance, public administration, and more. Prior to joining the Bureau, Paul was also the Executive Director of the 495 Metro West Partnership for 15 years. Under his leadership, the partnership led collaborations with legislators, municipal offices, business executives, and other regional institutions across the region on a wide range of policy and development initiatives. His leadership on public policy and regional issues led Paul to be appointed to both Governor Baker and previously Governor Patrick's to serve on the State Economic Assistance Coordinating Council, which oversees tax state incentive programs. He served as a member and a coordinator for the 495 Metro West Suburban Edge Community Commission, which examines suburban development needs, and Secretary of Transportation Stephanie Pollock appointed him to serve on the advisory committee for the East-West Rail Study, examining the potential of rail service from Springfield and Western Massachusetts to Boston, and the Rail Vision Plan, which called for expanded commuter rail operations. Paul was the recipient of the 40 Under 40 Award by the Worcester Business Journal and has been the recipient of the Metro West Regional Collaborative's Regional Spirit Award and Central Massachusetts Regional Planning Commission's Community Leadership Award. Those are a lot of words and a lot of awards. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage today's moderator, Paul Matthews.
Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, and I want to thank Karen and Carter and I. This is my second time pitching for Mark Donahue. No one is really going to replace Mark Donahue. I'm just going to do my very best to keep discussion moving. So I'll preface all this by apologizing in advance to the panelists and the audience. There's no way to cover all these issues in the detail they deserve, but in an effort to keep things moving, I'm going to call on different legislators, allow others to comment as well, and I might cut discussion on various questions to try to cover as much ground as possible. So I'm going to apologize in advance to everyone at the table if I do so, and all of you who might want to continue the discussion, rest assured all of our legislators are available at any point in time to discuss these issues. I also want to thank my former coworker, Jeremy Thompson, and my successor, Jason, from the 495 Metro West Partnership. And thank everyone here for taking the time to be here today, particularly our legislators. I will note, I believe the Senate's in session later today, so the timing of this is supposed to run from now until 9 o'clock with the moderated questions, and then from there we'll shift to a 15-minute discussion with Q&A from all of you that Karen will be running. So please respect the fact in that setting we're going to ask you to ask the questions and keep it simple, keep it brief, no monologuing please, because the effort is to cover as many issues as possible. These questions, some draw on last year's questions and are recurring that we've developed, but for the most part these are drawn from a survey Karen did of all of you as chamber members. Now, the other person I need to thank is a former chair of the Carter and I Chamber, Deborah Penta, who is now my current chair at the Worcester Regional Research Bureau. So rest assured, A, our focus is indeed regional, and B, you now have a tremendous handout straight from Penta Communications and Lydia Goldblatt in the back, explaining what the Bureau does in my new role. So on that note, we will shift into the first segment, which this is intended to be easy, other than the time frame involved. We're going to ask each legislator moving down the row to take 2 minutes to introduce themselves and what issue keeps them up at night related to public policy and legislation. So we'll give each of you 2 minutes. We're going to be a little vigilant. Karen has a bell, so at 2 minutes you'll hear a bell, and we'll ask you to move to your neighbor. So we'll begin with my former boss, Harriette Chandler, Senate President of Muradian.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you very much. This is something we look forward to every year. and we're happy to be here again. I'm Harriette Chandler. Most people call me Harley. And I represent the 1st Worcester District, which means that I have 3 precincts in this area. And I am happy to have those 3 precincts because that's what brings me here each year. What keeps me up at night? Well, as with most people, the thing that keeps me up at most at night is worrying about my family, especially my husband. Being a legislator gives you a unique opportunity to solve some of the real-world problems that you see in your own life and in the lives of those around you. I've been a long-time advocate for long-term care, and I think that it is time that we be more serious about it. It's a problem for our state, it's a problem for individuals, and we need to figure out how we're going to deal with the longer lives that we're all living and how we're going to pay for it. It's a very serious problem. So my own concerns, my own personal experience has reinforced this for me, and I continue to fight for better long-term care at nursing homes and in home care settings, and I'm going to push for some sort of a program, a policy, if you will, that maybe can affect each and every one of us in this room. So thank you.
So good morning, everyone. State Senator Eldridge, representing Westboro, Northboro, Southboro, Marlboro area, and then east to Acton up to the Devons, Erie, Shirley, Harvard area. So thanks to Quarter 9 for inviting me. And in terms of the issue that really keeps me up at night and had a particular focus over the past couple weeks, but I guess in many ways the past few years, is around criminal justice reform. I played a key role over the past 5 years in the legislature passing the criminal justice reform that passed 2 years ago, and now working hard to implement it as the Senate chair of the Judiciary Committee. But clearly there's a lot more work to be done. Probably a lot of folks have heard about the attack by a few inmates on some correction officers at the Susan Baranowski Maximum Security Prison, which is in my district in Shirley. And we want to make sure that the correction officers are safe, but also there's a lot of questions about the conditions of the prisoners, what access they have to education, what are we doing to rehabilitate prisoners. And it's not just an issue about individual rights or civil rights for prisoners or protections of the correction officers, but it's really also a budget issue. Is about the 4th highest expenditure for the state budget, around $600 million, is paying for our prison system, and that's every dollar that's going to incarcerate someone, which is about $50,000 a year, is money not going to health care, education, and protecting the environment. And so I think there's a big push now to reduce the prison population, but also to better rehabilitate prisoners. It's a question about returning citizens and how do we help them get employment, housing, support to become productive citizens. And I think there's still a long way to go in Massachusetts on improving our criminal justice system.
Good morning. I'm Carolyn, Dykema. I'm the state representative for 4 communities in the Metro West, including 2 in the Quarter 9 area, Southboro and part of Westboro. And I just want to thank Karen and the whole Quarter 9 team for putting this together. Tremendous job every year, and the room is always incredibly full at a very early hour, which is incredibly impressive, so thank you for that. What keeps me up at night? There are many things that keep me up at night, actually. But I guess the one that I would mention here is the impact of climate change on everything from our economy to tourism to our children's future. I have been increasingly, as we all have, I think, watching the science of climate change. It's dramatic. It's going to impact our planning on the coast. As a coastal state, we have very dramatic impacts on not only commercial construction, but on residential construction that we're going to have to kind of get our arms around for 10 years out, what that's going to mean for these coastal communities. One of the ways that we're working to address that is transportation, which I know is going to come up later in a couple of questions. But transportation here in Massachusetts, emissions from transportation are significantly higher than the general emissions levels in a lot of other states. So transportation is a much bigger part of the solution to climate for us here in Massachusetts, which also has the added benefit of improving the congestion situation by investing in public transit and really in low emissions vehicles for moving folks around. So I guess that's what keeps me up at night, and looking forward. I know I've got a lot of great partners here in this panel working on some of those issues too.
Good morning, everyone. Hannah Kane. I represent Shrewsbury, and I share Westboro with my colleagues, Representative Dykema and Representative Gregoire, and certainly Senator Eldridge as our Senate counterpart in Westboro, and in Shrewsbury, I get to work with Senator Moore as well. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with all of my colleagues up here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to come here today to discuss these issues with you. I think in general, what keeps me up at night right now is the situation of where public discourse is. In general, we have tremendous issues that we need to address both as a Commonwealth and as a country, and some of those issues overlap significantly. But I worry about our ability to do so in a way that isn't 140 characters to explain some of these issues that we have to deal with are very complex. There's a lot of different competing interests. There's a lot of different things to take into consideration. And at times, it becomes, I think, difficult to convey some of that complexity to folks, even with all of the additional ways in which we can communicate these days. It seems that our efforts sometimes are more difficult despite the more numerous ways to do so. And so one of the things that I find to be challenging, and one of the things that I do, I answer every email when I get myself, and I try and spend a lot of time if somebody sends me an email, with one very pointed perspective that tells me, you absolutely can't vote for this, and, I will hold you accountable at the ballot box. I say, great, you should hold me accountable at the ballot box, but let me give you a little bit more on this situation, on the complexity of this issue. And so I think making sure that we are open as voters to understanding that there's not a lot of black and white in life. There's a lot of, for a horrible analogy, many shades of gray. We need to understand that in our work on a daily basis, and we try and convey that to everyone else.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is David Muradian. I'm the state representative of Grafton, Northbridge, and Upton. I get to serve with some amazing people, many of which are here on this very panel. I'm in my third term, and while I have the institutional knowledge of being in the building beforehand, I still learn from these very people every day. And so, Karen, I want to thank you, and Paul, congratulations for everything. I know in the question that was originally put, it was worrying about the constituents. And truthfully, the more practical approach that I took with the question, at least looking at it, was the fact that sometimes the constituent inquiries do keep me up at night. Whether it's worrying about how you're going to vote on the bill, like Anna was saying, when someone wants to make sure that you're held accountable, or just doing general research into it. I know that there was a bill last session that, truthfully, you can ask my wife, I lost sleep over for the week leading up into it. I was up at like 3 o'clock in the morning doing my research and Googling and this and that. And I went into the chamber that day, and I think Hannah knows very well that I was undecided on the bill. And in that time that I was losing sleep, I wrote a 12-paragraph response as to why I voted for a bill. And then I wrote a 12-paragraph response as to why I voted against the bill. And I sat in the House chamber with those both on my desk while I tried to make the most educated decision I possibly could. And it's never been a letter for me next to a name. It's been about the issues and about the district. And I try to do the best that I can in educating myself for my constituents. And that's what keeps me up until at least 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock in the morning, pretty much every night. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Danielle Gregoire. I represent the 4th Middlesex District, which includes parts of the city of Marlborough and the towns of Northborough and Westborough. I think that it's really important that you hear commonality from us today, and I think you will hear that. And in addition to the issue around discourse, Representative Kane mentioned, and some of the things that Representative Muradian mentioned, I think it's important for us to point out that here in Massachusetts, we get it right most of the time. And Representative Muradian mentioned that it's not about a letter next to a name, and up here you don't see letters next to our names, but you have Republicans and Democrats on this panel, and we're able to work together in a really conscientious and civil and polite way to get things done, which I'm really proud of. And during this difficult time in our country, I wouldn't want to live anywhere other than Massachusetts, and I'm really proud of the work that we do here on a pretty daily basis. And with that, I just wanted to talk about something that no longer keeps me up at night, because we were able to solve it earlier this year, which is the crisis around e-cigarette use in our youth. I was the main sponsor of the vaping flavor ban bill, which was signed by the governor the day before Thanksgiving, and we are of the firm belief that that is going to save an entire generation of Massachusetts youth from being hooked on big tobacco. And I think it's really important to point out that that's not just an issue of youth and health. Massachusetts taxpayers pay over $1.25 billion in mass health costs alone for smoking-related health issues every year, and over $4.5 billion in private health insurance in smoking-related health issues. So it's not just a health issue for today, it's a health issue for generations to come, and I'm really proud of the work that we did on that. I understand that there are some people that are mad at me, and my Twitter feed has been interesting lately, and maybe those people could have a little bit of a lesson in civil discourse. But I'm just super proud of the work that we were able to do. We had a bipartisan vote. Representative Kane was the ranking member of the Public Health Committee. She took the floor to speak about how important the bill was that day, and I'm just proud to work with all these people every day.
Good morning, I'm Senator Michael Moore. I represent the 2nd Worcester District, which I represent the areas of Worcester that Senator Chandler doesn't represent. And then I represent the towns of Worcester, Auburn, Eldridge, Grafton, Shrewsbury, Upton, and half of Northbridge. Some of the things that keep me up at night, well, I can tell you last night, it's cold. So I apologize to all of you and to my colleagues here if you hear noises coming from my end as everyone's speaking. But you know, I was making a little list here. Well, as the longer I've stayed in the legislature, the more things that keep me up at night. It's a frustrating process from legislative to constituent services. Today we're voting on in the Senate, and it isn't just a voice vote, it's a Nikki's Law. It serves database being established to protect people who've been victimized by people who work for developmental disability providers. It seems like a no-brainer, but the law has taken 5 years to get passed. So it's bounced between the Senate and the House for the last 3 weeks. And I've got a bill dealing with sexual assaults on college campuses that's going to be coming out of committee, and then hopefully in the next 2 weeks. There's a lot of things that we think are no-brainers that you think can get passed easily, but when it goes from 1 year to 2 years to 3 years, these things start to accumulate, and they add up. That you're always, as Representative Muradian said, they stay in your mind, and as you're trying to figure out ways to get them through to really protect your constituents. The other thing is, we were talking about transportation. I chair the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security, but I also chair the Committee on Senate Bonding. And Miguel, as you know, if you're following the transportation, the governor's got an $18 billion transportation bond bill. That's before us. So that's going to be coming before, or it's an issue that our committee is going to be dealing with. Carolyn's all happy about that. The other thing is, it's really constituent issues. It's really constituent issues. But we got the DTA, Department of Transitional Assistance, moving from one location to another. It's bad for the clients. It's bad for the people in the neighborhood. And it's really trying to make sure that you balance your legislative work with your constituent work. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for keeping to the 2 minutes. And for our next set of questions, these questions were prepared by Karen based on feedback from all of you, and they were shared with the legislators in advance. So what I'll do is I'll read the question aloud, and then I'll look to my left, and if anyone wants to take the first response, by all means, raise your hand. What I will try to do is move through the dais to make sure everyone has a chance to respond to various questions. So the first is, given the state's recent report and ongoing attention to congestion, an issue I'm sure you all know well, what do you see happening to our state to change the current public transportation system to reduce our reliance on cars and address the congestion that is beginning to strangle our business development? Do I have a volunteer? Senator Chandler.
I think that there is no one in this room that does not understand this question, because you're right in the middle of it. You get it either way that you go, and it's become an impossible situation. We are trapped in our own cities. The only solution to this that I see is the absolute need to invest more in public transportation. It's not putting more cars on the road. That is certainly not the answer. But it's making sure that the RTAs are stronger, that we can depend on them, that they're reliable, that they're safe, and that they really do connect the communities. Most of these communities in central Massachusetts are not connected. And God forbid, if you're not able to have a car, you can't afford to have a car, there's no way to get from one community to another. That's a very serious problem in the economic development of our communities. And frankly, in the quality of life of the people who live in these towns. We have to also provide incentives to get people to use public transportation. That it has to be something, we have so much traffic that it is becoming really a very difficult situation. And yet we are still in a position where driving is still the best way of getting from one place to another. There is regular commuter rail problems. There is regular MBTA problems. There is the congestion that we're all talking about. I think the governor and his administration are aware of this. I'm sure they're aware of this, and they're trying to deal with it. It is not a simple problem. And your help and your patience is clearly needed in the future. And if you have any great ideas about this, we welcome them. We really welcome them. But we are, as I live in Worcester, and we're right in the midst of this. We need to take advantage of public transportation. That's the way we have to go.
Anyone else? Representative Dykema.
Thank you, Senator. This is an issue that I spend the better part of my day, every day, working on. It has, in the time that I've been in the legislature, become, I would say, one of the top 3 issues that I hear about all the time is dealing with congestion, whether that be on the Pike, where it takes now, it can take close to 2 hours to get into work in the morning on the Pike. And now we don't have rush hour. As we know, we have rush probably 4 hours in the morning and the evening. And many of you may have seen the Mass Bio survey that they did, saying that for the biotech industry, traffic and congestion is now becoming a significant consideration when people are choosing whether to stay here in Massachusetts. And when we're in a state where workforce is really our most critical natural resource that we have, if traffic is starting to have folks consider leaving Massachusetts, this key workforce that we need, this is something we have to take very seriously. And the challenge for us, one of the things, and the Senate President I know knows as well because she's been talking about this for a long time, is here in Metro West, often what we find ourselves doing is competing for resources with Greater Boston. Obviously, there's a big political center of gravity in Boston. They've got the T. When it comes to public transit, that gets a lot of attention. What we try to make the case for is, out here where we have a growing economy, here we are now job importers here in the Metro West region, we need to get, our share of the resources, especially to deal with public transit. So I'm really thrilled, and I think this is a later question, but we were thrilled that the governor and Secretary Pollack established a commuter rail vision exercise, which is really to take a very careful look at the commuter rail, which is essentially our key public transit mechanism out here in Metro West. The goal of the exercise was to take kind of a visionary look at the system and say, where do we need to be for the 21st century, including things like electrification, expanded service, all kinds of things to give us a state-of-the-art system to get folks off the road and into public transit. We, and I'm going to say we because I think all of us have been advocating that we cannot wait for a visionary system. It's great to have a vision, but we really need improvements on the line today. Across the system, we need more reliable transit. Trains need to show up on time. They need to get you where they are taking you to on time. I heard a story earlier this morning about someone who was going to a job interview and took the train, which we want to encourage here in Massachusetts, and ended up being an hour late for their job interview. That's not a situation that we can find acceptable. So we are proposing very aggressively in the upcoming transportation debate things like more locomotives and better signals and switches on the line. We've done a lot of analysis, and Rick Kane and I work on this pretty regularly. 60% of the delays on the line right now are caused by either failing machinery, old locomotives, which we have not invested in, or signals and switches that need more attention. So we're pushing for both of those things. Rep. Kane, I'm sure, is going to mention parking, which is another whole challenge for us out here in our region. But needless to say, it's very high in the priority list and something that we're paying a lot of attention to.
And I do know Hannah asked to speak next. Rest assured, everyone, every panelist can speak for 20 minutes on this.
Oh, I've got a few more minutes.
Thank you. So I just want to mention two things. The senator mentioned the transportation bond bill that the governor filed and being before bonding. And there's many dollars attached in that bond bill, but there's also some other critical elements that are necessary in this process. When we look at the projects that go on, they're major capital outlays, but there's also people needed, operational dollars that are needed to ensure that we have the people who can actually oversee those projects and put them out. In a great economy like we have right now, it's even more of a challenge sometimes to have those folks coming into state government to work on those things. So we need to make sure, because for the last few years, we actually haven't been able to spend every capital dollar that's allocated because we do not have the people to operationally do so. So we want to make sure that we're able to do that. Secondarily, there are some things in the governor's bond bill which deal with giving some additional flexibility in terms of how projects get done. And one of them is everyone wants to have the public infrastructure system fixed and maintained and properly working. The challenge is anytime you put a project out there and you start to do that, people then complain that now they are either late getting where they're trying to go because the effort to actually fix something impedes their ability to move. In the governor's bill, one of the things that they're seeking is, for instance, if they had to put out a bid on a project and one team comes in and bids $100 million and it's going to take them 2 years to do the project, and another team bids, we can do it for $105 million and we can do it in 4 months. The structure of the way we have to do it now is we have to go with the lowest bid, who's qualified, which would be $100 million for 2 years. They're seeking some ability to value time so that we can move these projects forward in a faster motion than we might otherwise be able to do. And so there are some elements of what we're talking about relative to transportation, even though you hear the revenue discussion a lot, there's some other tools that we're seeking to get that will help us move these projects forward quickly.
Senator Moore.
I think the other issue we have is, Representative Dykema brought up, there's also regional equity. When a lot of these bills or transportation bond bills are passed, everyone's looking at Boston. And the people in Boston think, okay, they look at the infrastructure they have. Well, as we all know, the further west you go, from Metro West to Worcester, even Springfield, we don't have the infrastructure that everyone has. But the concentration seems to be the T. And how the resources are going to impact the T. Well, looking at the transportation bond bill, one thing I've noticed is that they want, I think it's $2.5 or $3 billion for the South Coast Rail. And Representative Kane just brought up the fact that of all the delays we have with the current system. So I worry about that we have to have regional equity. We need to look at the mitigation, how we're going to, when the work's being done. But they also have to look at, I think any one of you have your business. If your current operations aren't efficient and operating smoothly, you look at expansion. Well, the concern I have is we're looking at expanding the T and expanding all these services. We have a system from the T to the commuter rail that's coming out to Worcester that they want out in Springfield. That we don't even have a system yet that's operating efficiently. So how do we keep expanding the system, and do we keep expanding the problems we have unless we get the current system up and running smoothly before we continue to make these major investments in the expansion of this and into a service that we need to address.
And Senator Eldridge, I know you asked to address this question too, so I'll allow you to do so. We do need to move through the other questions, given time.
Yeah, I would just say that, I think it's clear to everyone in this panel and the delegation is a very strong advocate for improving transportation, whether public transportation or improving roads and bridges. I certainly want to just raise, one point is, figuring out how to pay for it is raising taxes. And I think that there's a number of discussions going on. I know that I think someone in legislative leadership estimated that, it's possible looking to raise around $700 million. And I do think, especially, given the chamber is business leaders, as business owners weighing in on the tax front. I know there's been discussion around the gas tax. I find that, Metro West, there's differing opinions on that. about whether that's reasonable, especially if that money comes back to this region. But there's concerns that it's regressive, that it particularly hurts working families and people that are driving long distances, which certainly applies to this area. I have been very focused on progressive taxation, so raising taxes on wealthy people, closing corporate tax loopholes, and making sure that big corporations pay their fair share. And I just really want to highlight that, if we're really serious about improving our public transportation infrastructure, we do have to find a way to pay for it. And so we need to, have that discussion about a balanced approach to how we're all going to contribute and pay our fair share of taxes to really improve the system, because it really has reached a crisis, particularly for this region of Massachusetts.
And Rep. Dykema referenced skilled workforce, which parlays right into the next question. In the survey of chamber members, one of their top needs is a skilled workforce. And as part of this budget, the governor is proposing a new $15 million vocational program. Do you support this proposal, and how else do you think the state can best respond to workforce needs? Representative Reagan.
Thanks, Paul. I'm very supportive of this, and I think it kind of goes in line with something that both myself and Senator Moore worked quite diligently on, and that's the Blackstone Valley Fab Lab, which is a fabrication lab. And basically, what we're doing in partnering with the Blackstone Valley Chamber is you have industries that provide the different machinery and things like that that individuals will be working on, and the students can actually go in and learn directly on those machines, so that when they come out, they are ready to go into the field. It's very similar to the Career Technical Initiative that the legislature worked quite closely with the skills capital grants on in the cabinet. And so basically what we're going to be doing with this $15 million now is you look at vocational schools and you see if they deal with their students through the day, but then you ask them to stay open later. And so the comprehensive schools can then come in from 2 to 5 o'clock. And then after that can be anyone else who's kind of underemployed who maybe wants to grow their skill set. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to kind of grow from that. This industry is something that's absolutely booming. It's something I think we can certainly do a lot more in terms of advocating for and supporting, and it's a wonderful initiative in my opinion.
Senator Moore.
Representative Muradian hit on a very good point. The Blackstone Valley Chamber is actually part of this collaboration between the Chamber of Commerce, it's between the manufacturers. So the students that are going to be coming in there from the schools that may have been denied access to the Valley Tech, the vocational school, they're going to be getting training on the machines that these employers actually need. So when they're done with the training, they will have the skills to go directly into employment for these companies. And actually, 2 days ago, myself and Jean Ebert, the Executive Director for Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce, met with the Regional Carpenters Training Center in Milford. So it serves all of the New England area. What we are looking at doing there is hoping to access some of this funding and have the students basically go on an internship program. Why they're in the traditional, when Representative Muradian talked about a comprehensive school, those are traditional K through 12 high schools. So what they would do is they would get an internship, and during that period of time they are away from the school, they would go to the carpentry school and they would learn carpentry, welding, the type of skills right now where we have a big void. We have a lot of need for these skilled laborers and people, and they can graduate without going to college. If they want to go, they can go. But they don't have to go, they don't have to incur the student loans, the student loan debt, and all the expense. They can come out, they do an apprenticeship for 2 years, 3 years, and they can start their own business. So this is a way of trying to fill the void. The Blackstone Valley Vocational School, I have 4 voc schools in my Senate district. And we roughly have, the Blackstone Valley alone has 600 kids on the waiting list. And between the 4 schools, we have anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000. Students that are trying to get these skills that can't get in. So I think this is addressing a critical aspect of the economy that we need to fill the void on, so that we can have carpenters, plumbers, electricians. These are all things that technology changes are not going to replace.
And we've also talked about in this panel already transportation and climate change, which leads to the next question. Do you support the governor's net goal of net zero emissions by 2050 and his intention to move forward with the Regional Transportation Climate Initiative despite concerns raised by other states? I have a volunteer, Senator Eldridge.
Yeah, so as Senator Moore mentioned, the Senate is taking up a very comprehensive climate change bill today. And that includes also net zero emissions by 2050 goal. So this, as far as I can tell, matching what Governor Baker announced is the State of the Commonwealth address. So I fully support that. And I think one thing that's really been challenging, and I would say Representative Dykema has done just tremendous work on climate change, and the House has passed a strong bill on this too, is just how complicated energy policy is, and how do we actually get to reducing our carbon emissions, whether by 2050 or sooner. And part of that, in my view, is the Transportation Climate Initiative proposed by Governor Baker. So I fully support that, and that is one way, in my view, that we can raise revenue, because it's sort of a cap and trade approach to transportation that could raise revenue for public transportation, which obviously is absolutely critical to reducing emissions. So I support Governor Baker's proposal. The TCI is clearly becoming a challenge because unfortunately some states, in other states in New England, have withdrawn from the proposal. But it seems like Governor Baker and his team are very committed to seeing it through, and would really make sure Massachusetts remains a leader in reducing emissions for the country.
Anyone else? Or Representative Dykema?
Just to echo some of what the senator said, I think there's a broad agreement that we can get to net zero by 2050. In fact, the governor, the Secretary of the EEA just presented a very clear graph showing not only aspiring to get there, but we actually can get there. And the administration has looked carefully at how we're going to do that. I actually think we can probably do better than that, but knowing that we can get there at a minimum, I think is a great target for us to all agree on. TCI, I think, is kind of a sweet spot. I think it's a great initiative. It's a market-based approach to putting a price on carbon. I mean, everyone here in the business community knows that when you've got a price on something, it now gets factored into your decision making. So if you put a price on carbon, there will then kind of be unleashed the market forces that will provide the innovation and the attention that will drive down the use of carbon. So not only will that address our climate concerns, which I had mentioned earlier, but it will also provide revenue that we can use to reinvest in the type of transportation infrastructure like public transit, like electric vehicles, which we are also supporting. We just recently voted to continue the EV program to get folks into electric vehicles to cut down on our carbon. So I think it's a great step forward, and hopefully, we would establish a market-based mechanism that could then be expanded toward all of the building, heating, and other types of needs that generate carbon as well. So sort of a stepwise approach that's very well thought through. And in fact, the fact that it's regional, one of the concerns with a carbon tax is that it would impact us economically. It would create additional fees and tariffs in Massachusetts that would hurt our competitive ability. The TCI critically is a regional approach, where there are 12 different states. The governor and the administration are negotiating with those states to try and bring everybody on board and kind of agree to a set of common rules that we can move forward as a region, and potentially as a region have a much greater impact on the overall climate goals than we could as an individual state.
Another issue that arose in the Chamber survey quite definitively, and Karen asked me to make a priority question, is the different initiatives that address individuals' needs, such as minimum wage and family medical leave, can pass a negative impact onto employers. Given the vulnerabilities of some employers, particularly retailers and other seasonally susceptible employers, how can the state assist these businesses while implementing the new requirements? Volunteer, Representative Muradian.
Thanks again, Paul. I was one of the individuals up on the panel and in the legislature who was against the minimum wage increase. Not that individuals deserve a standard living wage. I just think that 15 was an arbitrary number. I think that it was put an undue burden on a lot of people, especially in this room, in the business community. I think that many of you already pay a very practical wage in your industry. I fear that it was just going to be inflation, and that's kind of what we're seeing. However, talking about PFML, what some of that does is basically allows you to hire a temporary replacement when you have an individual who goes out on leave. And so they do have the protection to come back and have their job when they get there. Now, when you let go of the individual who was the temp, they can basically file for unemployment. And they need to qualify. And if they do qualify, it would affect the employer's UI rating. And I think many of you here can understand the detrimental effect that you would feel there. Now, what we're trying to do in the legislature, and Jeff Roy, who's from Franklin, has a bill. It's House Bill 1093. And what that would say, that it would say that if the employee is deemed eligible for unemployment, those benefit charges shall not accrue to the employer's experience rating. So that's something to try to alleviate some of the unforeseen consequence that came to all of your industry when the legislature passed this grand bargain. So that's one of the things that we're certainly trying to do. It gives you an opportunity to make sure that you keep your UI rating where it should be.
Senator Moore? Actually, Rep. Muradian and I were sitting there for having our breakfast. I think the first speaker talked about the marijuana tax and the casino, the gaming, and giving the credit to the legislature. Well, I think this goes to the minimum wage and other aspects that we just mentioned. One thing we need to do is give the business community more time to implement changes that are initiated by the voters. Those are all referendum issues that we have to deal with, that are going to go to the ballot. We try to resolve them so that the impact is fair on both sides. And if we don't come to a compromise, then they go to the ballot. And then when they go to the ballot, or when we do pass the compromise, we need to give you a long enough period of time to look at the implementation, to see what issues are going to arise that the voter never thought of or the advocates never thought of when they drafted the legislation. So I think we need to have a longer implementation period so that we can deal with the effects that may not have been thought about or would have been realized when the legislation was drafted.
Thank you, Senator. One issue we have not yet discussed is housing. The governor has made that a steady priority, not just limited to affordable housing. It's also a key legislative goal and priority. Do you feel that 9,495 communities need to do more to expand housing, and how can the state best encourage that? Volunteers, Senator Chandler.
Housing is very expensive here. This is an expensive state to live in, as you all know. And housing can't be seen by itself. It really has a partner in this, and that's transportation. So you have to look at the two together. There are very few affordable housing options, and that becomes a problem. This is particularly true in the Boston area where there's lots of housing going up, but it's the most expensive luxury housing you can possibly have, and that doesn't work. All these young people who are flocking to Boston for the jobs that are available there can't live there, can't afford to live there. People on my own staff have a problem. They can't, all of us have people who are suffering from this issue of they have to move further and further out. Housing at its core also deals with the issue of zoning laws, and that needs to be changed. We need to be able to expand the production of housing. It's a supply and demand. We don't have enough of a supply to meet the demand that we have. So I think that we have not put out a major housing bill, major housing piece of legislation, other than housing bond bills, which are lovely and are very needed, but we haven't gotten to the core of some of the policy issues that really underpin this whole issue. And hopefully this will happen this year. Everybody is very concerned about it. We understand the problem. We have to have the will to go through with it. And there are special interest groups, unfortunately, that have blocked real housing changes over the years. We can't let that continue to happen.
Senator Eldridge.
Yeah, so housing is absolutely critical, and I do really sense momentum to pass a housing production bill this session. I really want to commend Harriette, Chandler, who's worked literally decades on getting a housing production bill and zoning reform legislation through the legislature. With respect to the different proposals, I think there's the sort of zoning reform, making the production of multifamily housing more easy, which I know can be a sensitive issue in the suburbs. Governor Baker has his housing choice bill, which I do support, although I'd like to see it go further. Where I push back a little bit on the governor's proposal is that his proposal really isn't for affordable housing. It's just the idea that if you produce tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands more housing, some of it will be affordable. The free market works in a number of sectors. I actually don't think it works very well in housing as far as producing workforce or affordable housing. And that's because, the communities in Metro West are such attractive places to live in, such great schools, that housing prices are always going to be very high. And so that's when you get into, how do you make sure that we actually produce some affordable housing? The side of that, which I view beyond zoning reform, which is everything from inclusionary zoning, saying that if there's a development, that 20% of it must be affordable housing, supporting our public housing authorities and helping them build more senior or housing for the disabled, is the funding side. And so there's a number of proposals for luxury, taxing luxury housing. It can be a local option, it can be statewide, to create the revenue that can go to cities and towns to produce affordable housing. We're here in Westboro. Westboro does a terrific job on building affordable housing. I would say for the 14 communities I represent, it's really one of the leaders in building affordable housing. But if the town received more financial support, more funding, it can have the subsidies to build affordable housing. If you don't have those subsidies, if you don't have those requirements for developers to build affordable housing, the reality is it'll all be high-end market housing.
Can I add?
Senator, I'm sorry, but we're about to jump into the next section with questions from the public. But before we do that, I want to ask one last question regarding education, which has not yet been addressed. How do you think the implementation of the Student Opportunity Act and the increased funding for school districts will impact education in each of your districts? Senator Moore?
I'm going to say it's going to depend on the demographic of the community. I have the city of Worcester, which over 7 years, goes on the Carolyn, and have the city of Worcester. It's going to, over 7 years, it's going to receive over $100 million. Then I may have the town of Millbury or Grafton, that over the 7 years, well, I think Millbury's going to receive about an additional $100,000. Grafton, I think, was $1 million we looked at. So it's really going to depend on the demographic, the wealth of the community, which that really was the intent of the legislation. If you had issues with the need for additional resources for the types of students or families that you're going to be serving, that's really going to determine the type of additional resources that you got to get.
Anyone else? Representative Green?
Just to follow up on the Senator's point, because we do share our district, I fear that this bill, and it was a needed bill, Commonwealth-wide, but I do fear that it could potentially hurt my communities with it being maybe a net zero, net negative impact. And this was a decision that was based off of conversations with Desi, the House Chair of Education, was very upfront to me when I had my concerns. I would have loved to have seen a clawback provision, especially for the communities and the districts that are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars over the 7 years, to make sure that they're not just going to salaries. I understand we have to pay our educators a attractive wage, but making sure that it's not just spent on that, it's actually meant to further the education for our students. I also would have loved to have seen teeth in the bill as to how we'd actually fund the bill. It's going to be quite interesting if we do take an economic downturn, which I certainly hope doesn't happen, but if we do, $1.5 billion over 7 years is going to be unbelievably difficult for us to come up with. So that does concern me. But ultimately, like many of us on this panel, we had to put our vote in support of something that benefits all 351 cities and towns. We have to take that into account as to what we look at. And so I did support the bill. I believe that a rising tide lifts all boats, but I'd love to certainly see how we can continue to make sure that districts that do have, and Senator Moore alluded to the demographic challenges. So Low income was a big thing that the money went towards in the bill. ELL, and just for Grafton, Northbridge, and Upton, that's not necessarily speaking our language. So from there, I need to make sure that we continue to advocate. I know there's going to be a big push to add to per pupil when it comes to the House budget, and I'm sure the Senate budget, things of that nature. So not every decision is always up and down, or as Hannah said earlier, black and white. And so that's one of the things that I struggle with. Thank you.
I do know I'm under strict instructions from Karen to shift the Q&A with the audience, so that discussion will go much longer. So Karen's got the mic. She will be.
Here's your opportunity to ask questions and from the audience, and please understand that I will never let the microphone leave my hands. And you must ask a question.
Yes,
Okay?
no monologuing, please.
Thank you.
No vaudeville.
Take it.
Good morning, Dan Barrico. Travel and tourism, you haven't touched on. This state spends less disproportionately, irrespective of our population differences between many of our neighboring states and some not so neighboring, including Virginia, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York. Why does travel and tourism budget still get kind of lesser?
Volunteers? Senator Eldridge?
Well, I would just say that I think that is an area where, respectfully, the governor and legislature have had a very different perspective, is that the governor has consistently underfunded Office of Travel and Tourism, and the legislature has increased funding, particularly this past year. And I do really want to commend Senate President Karen Spoka, because she's really pushed for that and actually created, Travel and Tourism Office in this region, in part led by her now aide, Susan Nichols. So I think that the investment is going up. It's certainly less, to your point, much less than other states, and yet it's, I think, the second highest source of revenue for the state is travel and tourism. So I think it's on a positive arc, and certainly I think Metro West is definitely, through the regional office, is definitely selling the region more for tourism. But I'm hoping this is an area where you see further increase going into the budget season.
I know Senator Moore wanted to add.
It's quickly, it's more choices. As we talked about, we just talked about school funding. Over the 7 years, it's going to be $1 billion. We talked about the need for transportation. No one wants to pay more taxes. No one wants. So every year we have to prioritize. And I know it's a big economic driver here in Massachusetts, but we have limited resources. We have to have a balanced budget. And if we're not going to come back to you and keep digging into your pockets, we have to make the choices to live within our means.
Karen, do you mind if I jump in real quick? Sorry, I was speaking with Andy Davis earlier, and I just want to give Andy a shout out. Massport, Worcester Airport, that's a wonderful tool and an asset for us in terms of tourism and bringing people into our region. So doing what we can to try to make sure we support them and get over the 200,000 passengers a year that are anticipated to go through. Let's get it to 300,000. I know I booked a trip for my dad that's coming up in March. If we can start to grow that, then we can actually become a destination for people to come to visit. I mean, I know we have autumn, which is so beautiful in New England, but we have so much more to offer.
Can I just say one thing as well? Quick. Sure. Having chaired a conference of the National Council of State Legislatures about 2 years ago, one of the things we saw when we brought 6,000 people here, people want to come to Massachusetts. There's so much reason to come to Massachusetts. We have the beaches, we have the mountains, we have everything imaginable. It's a beautiful place. There's so much to see. There's so much history here. So it's not going to be a hard lift. It's not a heavy lift to get people here. And it's an economic driver, and we should realize that. And I think we are coming to that, as everybody else has said.
Can we go back to the mic?
Hello, my name is Steve Gillis. I'm talking to you as a representative of the town of Brookfield, Massachusetts, none of your districts. Okay. The issue I'm talking about, I think, applies to many of your communities, though, and that is, I'm the chairman of the Financial Advisory Committee, so we put together the budgets for the town. Our town is up against problems with hiring qualified town accountants and town treasurers. It's a shrinking pool of talent. Municipal law and municipal financing is very, very complex. very different than just being a CPA. So my question to you is, how can you foster alternative programs to help us find and hire qualified people who can help us manage our finances? We work through an organization right now we found with the town accountant, Pioneer Valley Planning Commission out of Springfield, Massachusetts, great organization. We actually bid it out with them, a process where they provided us, we're paying for it, but a town accountant. We need a town treasurer. We need these types of resources. Smaller communities need this. Wealthier communities are hiring these people out. Is there methods of either supplementing these types of services or providing us with supplementary budgets in order to help hire people? I'll be here afterwards.
Let's let them answer. Representative Kane?
Sure. So I sit as a member of Shrewsbury's Finance Committee as well. I'm very well aware of this issue. And it's not just in the finance area, actually. We have this, I sat on a commission this year on local and regional public health. We don't have a pipeline of people going into the public health positions, many of which are in our communities as well. So it's sort of an across-the-board issue, and again, particularly in a very strong economy, we're not always able to compete at the municipal level when individuals have opportunities to go into the private sector. There's also some issues relative to retirement credit. So sometimes there's an issue between states. So you may have somebody from Rhode Island who wants to come here to take a job, but there's an issue with how they'll be compensated for their years into the retirement service there. That is something that we've been asked to take a look at. But again, this is an issue that I've heard in multiple different venues, including in my own town, and also Westboro as well. Had to go back out twice to seek people to serve in these roles. So it is not an issue that we're not unaware of. I think that there hasn't been any proposal that I've heard of relative to supplemental funding for it. But I do think it's something that we need to be cognizant of.
Anyone else? Representative Gregoire?
I just want to echo what Representative Kane said, and I think in addition to the public health officials, we're seeing it in school administrations and again throughout towns at the highest levels. I have concern about trying to find more funding allocation for this. If people aren't available, they aren't available. So in my opinion, we should look towards some sort of a training program, maybe either working with Mass Municipal or some of the other organizations so that we can get people to go into the pipeline of doing these kinds of things. And it is something that we hear about sporadically, and I think it's critically important that you bring it up to us here this morning, because when we hear it's not just happening in a town where we represent, it's important to us to try to look towards policy that will impact this. And I think it's probably something that we should be focusing on that we haven't yet. So admittedly, as Senator Moore said earlier about a different question, it's maybe not necessarily an issue of bandwidth, it's an issue of us hearing from you, which is exactly why we're here this morning, to move forward with trying to come up with a plan. I think people are retiring. The churn in the local public schools has been tremendous over the last 10, 15 years. They've probably had that many superintendents, or at least somewhere between 8 and 10. So I think it's, like I said, critically important for us to hear from you on these things and potentially work together moving forward with a plan that doesn't necessarily just involve funding, but involves some sort of training and pipeline situation.
Speaking of hearing from you, I know Karen has another question.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming. I called Representative Kane's office about 2 little children that I know of in Worcester, and her aid was unbelievably helpful, but really strangled by the fact that the human services do not talk to each other. You can call DTA, you can call DMH, no one is talking to each other. So you've got little kids that want to go to school and there's a year waiting for daycare vouchers. You've got a mom who wants to work but can't because the kids can't go into daycare. Like, how can we get our system to help get these, poor people lifted up so they can become contributing members of the society? So thank you so much for what your office did, but we're still in the same situation that we were because you guys couldn't do much.
Representative Gregoire, your motion, do you want to answer?
Yes, please. So I've been pushing throughout the entirety of my time in the legislature and even before I was elected for consolidation in Health and Human Services. HHS in Massachusetts is the largest secretariat by far. There are 18 undersecretariats in HHS, and they don't talk to one another. And it's not just impacting kids, it's impacting people with mental health issues, people with substance use disorder. And when DTA and DMH and DCF and all of these other organizations are not working together, and you have to fill out every single form for every single organization, and it's mind-boggling to me that something hasn't been done, because not only would it be a benefit to the people who need those services so critically, it would be a benefit to us as taxpayers and to us as residents, because we would be getting people services sooner, so it would end up costing significantly less in the long run, and it would streamline those services so that they would cost less in the front as well. So it's something that I've filed legislation on, that I've tried to work with folks on, and unfortunately it's just so huge of an issue and an umbrella that it's almost daunting when folks try to look at it. But I think it's something that we need to do, and it's something that I will continue to push for.
Thank you. Representative Kane.
Thank you. It is a challenge for us in a number of levels, and one of the things, you know, when I think back with my business degree and my former business hat on as a small business owner, to me, we make a lot of stranded investments from a state government perspective. We might be helping out a person over here, but they're not able to leverage that because they have these 3 other core issues, and they may be eligible for these other things, but there isn't that sort of looking at it holistically perspective. It's still a bit into silos. We also come across issues where, as legislators, we're not privy to all the information because of privacy aspects. So depending on where the engagement is with somebody, you know, there's limited insight that we can get into it. And so that becomes a challenge as well in terms of trying to see the whole picture of what's going on. But I, yesterday, 2 days ago, attended my first meeting going on a Youth Homeless Commission. And the conversation was a proposal by some Harvard Business School students around a better way to approach when a teen youth presents, to problem solve around how to get them help. And on the one hand, I thought, this is great. And on the other hand, I thought, dear God, we're not already doing this. Like, this is horrifying. And so, you know, a lot of the work that we do as legislators isn't just a sort of in the constituent services piece or in the legislating piece. We're working to solve some of these problems that exist out there, and either through commissions, through our own interest in just inserting ourselves into things like this. But a lot of times we are up against, and it's not just a single administration, by the way, it sort of stretches across the way in which state government is organized. But sometimes we need to step back and reflect, like, is this the best way to approach these problems? Like, we're organized in a certain manner, but the problem exists out there in a different way. And are we really giving all the forethought that we need in terms of best making sure that if we are making an investment in this person, that they're able to fully utilize that? So if somebody wants to work, and yet they can't get access to a child care voucher, even though they qualify, because they're down on the list and there's many people there, that's an issue. And we're not, so over here we're still continuing to support somebody on the public benefit side who actually wants to go to work and not have to be on that side. And so if we think about that investment, where's the best way for the state to put an investment into that person to make sure they can be sustainable and productive themselves in their own lives?
I know both Senator Moore and Senator Chandler want to answer this.
I just got one quick comment on the child care and the vouchers. The problem you have right now also is access to affordable services for early education for child care. Our early educators roughly make $26,000, $27,000 a year. If they're lucky, they need to get a master's degree, a bachelor's to master's. They can come in starting without those degrees, excuse me, and then they can get their education as they go forward. But again, here's someone that needs a salary increase that basically comes from the Commonwealth, that until we hire more early educators, we're going to continue to have a backup, and the access issue is going to continue to grow because these providers can't hire more teachers or more early educators because the salary is so low. And as soon as the person attains their master's degree, what do? They leave and go to the public system. So this system is compounded between the private sector not having the resources of the skilled labor because they can't meet the salary demands, plus maybe some bureaucracy on the state side.
And Harriet, while you answer quickly, I know Karen has one last question.
The human service situation has been, as long as I've been in the legislature, I've been there a while, has always had a problem. It is complicated, it is complex, and the communications are terrible. The siloization of this is awful. And you are assuming that we know everything. And I want to assure you, we don't. They have just moved, they're in the process of moving the Office of Transitional Assistance in Worcester. It deals with 22, 28 different communities. They're moving it from where they've been in downtown Worcester out on Route 20. It's, for some people, it will be a 2-hour ride, transferring buses to get there with little children and you know, taking them along. We didn't know about it until the contract was signed, the build-out is done, and here we are with this awful situation. So please don't assume that we know everything, because the communication doesn't allow it to happen. The process is so flawed, it has to be changed, and we've had so many different commissioners under so many different administrations, and it is almost, it's an obstacle, of course, and it's always been that way, but we can't stop. We've got to find a solution to it. These are lives we're talking about.
And I know this is the last question. We're already over the time frame. Carolyn.
Good morning. Can you just explain, when you have a bill out there, what would take so long when it's a bill that you would think is something that should already be in place? You're thinking, why isn't this in place? And it has no opposition, and it goes for 5 years over and over, just like you mentioned. What's taken so long to pass these bills when they seem so simple, so obvious, and your constituents are getting so frustrated, but they're not going to give up? And what's taken so long to pass these bills?
I think
The House of Representatives.
before the House members say the Senate, let me just say, man, it is tough for them to answer that question without knowing the specific bill. And having worked in the building, I will add, there's two sides to every bill.
There's even no-brainers have people who are opposed to it. So there's 6,500 bills that are filed this session. So to say that no one opposes anything, I don't know if that ever really occurs. And as the bill moves forward, everyone wants to weigh in. Everyone has an opinion on that no-brainer. And so that no-brainer becomes a complicated issue.
David?
Just to further that point, with the 6,000 to 7,000 bills that are filed, only a couple hundred will get signed into law. To your point of how frustratingly maddening the system can be. But our system's set up that way so that any bill doesn't just become a law. There are so many different hearings that need to take place, committees that it needs to go through, and as the senator said, each kind of committee wants to put their own individual touch on a lot of bills. And so that's just to kind of get it out of one branch. And then it has to do the same thing in the other branch. And then it has to go back to the original branch for vote, and then back to the secondary branch for vote, and then to the governor's desk. So it's an unbelievably difficult process, especially when you hear us talking about so many things. We have housing choice, we have a budget that's going to be, the hearings are going to be coming up for, transportation bonds. Those are only a couple of issues, but those are issues that are kind of always going on, and the conversations are always taking place about those. So there are so many different balls in the air that sometimes well-intentioned bills that you would think are common sense just unfortunately do take a little bit more time.
Can I just share that the frustration that you feel is a frustration that we feel? There is no good answer for why it takes that long. There is an enormous funnel. So you go from 6,500 bills that all have people advocating for and many times against, but you have constituencies who are looking to move those bills. And we have a process by which at the end of the day, you get largely down to having to have a few key people making decisions about what's going to move forward, and there's capacity issues there. So unfortunately, there's no good reason why it takes so long on some of these bills that seem straightforward and don't have a lot of or any hard push against them. But, you know, we are 200 members of an institution, and there are capacity issues. And so, you know, at the end of the day, it is very frustrating for those of us sitting up here as well, who also have bills, and I'm very aware of what your bill is and have attempted to move this bill in any session, so your frustration is my frustration. But, you know, you also have 200 members who are racing to get their bills pushed through the process, and so there's a lot that comes down, and we operate on 2-year legislative cycles. So if a bill doesn't make it all the way through in one cycle, you then have to refile it and you start over, you know, in the next cycle in terms of going through the process. So it can be very frustrating, and I wish we had a better answer for you.
And I know the last word on this will be Representative Dykema.
Thanks, Paul. I was just reflecting on kind of what we've been talking about over the last few questions, and there's a lot of, you know, it's a time-consuming process, and there's a lot of moving parts to state government. It's challenging to get things done, and I think persistence is key, and the folks that show up repeatedly, what may seem like far too often, that they have to show up, but, you know, that's how things finally get done in terms of going to the, you know, top of the pile. One of the things that I did want to mention in response to this woman's comment in the back about the children and getting support for children, you know, vulnerable children in our Commonwealth, I think are an issue that touch a lot of us in a close place, especially those of us that are parents. And the foster system has also gotten a lot of attention. The speaker has just delegated our Assistant Chair of Ways and Means, Denise Garlick from NEDA, to kind of spearhead that issue and look closely at our foster care system. And I just wanted to maybe finish off our presentation today with a little bit of light, because there are some really good things happening in state governments and pockets, and we try to pick our spots where we can with the hope that we can expand programs that are successful. And I just wanted to highlight one of those when it comes to at-risk kids, which is a pilot program through the courts and DCF and Department of Youth Services, which is our youth criminal justice arm of state government, with foster children who come into contact with the criminal justice system. And for those of you who may have a mental health connection, childhood trauma, there's a lot of trauma that comes out of the foster care system for young people that have challenges, and unfortunately that can sometimes result in behaviors that bring them into contact with the criminal justice system. And so there's a new pilot in Hampden County that is being, with the judicial system, with basically all state agencies came together to remove these silos for a very specific group of children, which are those, you know, foster children that come into contact with criminal justice. And they have a roundtable. So when these children enter the courts, they do not get processed normally. They actually create a team around this child with all of the social service providers, with the police, anyone who has touched them, and a connected family member to support that child, and literally come up with a plan for keeping that child out of detention and putting them back in a stable situation with supportive services that will help them succeed. And all of this is being measured. It's a combination of state resources plus foundation resources that are brought to bear on this. And they have very dramatic results showing that the vast majority of these kids are staying out of the criminal justice system, are being stabilized, and are having successful futures. So I guess to leave on a positive note, there's a lot of really interesting creative things going on, and we just hope to see more of that, and when things work, to expand them to a bigger scale.
To close on another positive note, I want to add, not only do you see these legislators here today and every other year, and it's a real testament to their commitment to the chamber that they all turn out for this event and they're all committed. But they are in the community, they are available, they are accessible every day of the year, not just this morning, not just today, and not just for you in front of the chamber. So I know the chamber distributed their contact information. I'm sure you all know how to reach them. They're one of the most accessible delegations in the entire state. So I urge you, if any of the discussion today raise questions in your mind, you want follow-up input, by all means contact them. They are absolutely going to be responsive. And on that note, I now need to turn it over to my friend Karen Chapman, who in my opinion is one of the best chamber executives in the state. So you're lucky to have her.
I'm going to ask the legislators to please stand. We're going to do a nice group photo of you. And Chris Costa, please join us. Paul, right over here. For all of our legislators, they are really nice to Boston, if you know that. Thank you for another great discussion. And also, please join me in giving a round of applause to our moderator this year, Paul Matthews, who truly is a champion, has been working on public policy for years. Thank you for the great job today, Paul.